I knew something was wrong the moment my son leaned over my plate. It wasn't what he said. "Mom, try this special gravy I made." No, it was the way he said it. His voice was too soft, too sweet, like he'd rehearsed it in the car. And that smile, it didn't reach his eyes. It stretched across his face like a mask someone forgot to finish carving. Jeremy never cared about Thanksgiving food. For years, he barely glanced at what I cooked. Yet now, he hovered beside me with a bowl of gravy clutched in his hand, watching me the way a child watches a fuse burn toward a firecracker. His fingers rested on the edge of my plate, just barely, almost trembling, like he needed to stay close until I took the first bite. That was the detail that chilled me. A grown man leaning in too far, too eager, too insistent. I looked at him, really looked at him, and something deep inside me tightened. Then my eyes shifted to Sheila, his wife, laughing at the other end of the table, her untouched plate sitting directly next to mine. She wasn't paying attention. She never was, at least not when she should be. I couldn't explain the impulse that grabbed hold of me. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the quiet voice I'd learned to trust after 7 decades of watching people reveal themselves one mistake at a time. While everyone else focused on conversation and clattering dishes, I slid my hand across the tablecloth, lifted my plate, and switched it with Sheila's. Smooth. Silent. Emotion so natural it looked like I was just making room for the rolls. Only one person noticed. Jeremy's smile flickered. His eyes darted to the plates, then back up at me. His jaw tightened for half a second before he forced the sweetness back into place. "That one's yours, Mom," he said lightly. "I made it just for you." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I share real stories just like this one. I took a bite of mashed potatoes from the plate now in front of me. They tasted exactly the same as always, creamy, peppered, simple. Nothing unusual. Nothing to fear. But 20 minutes later, Sheila went quiet. At 25, she gripped the table like it was sliding out from under her. Her face drained of color, lips trembling, breath shortening. At 30 minutes, she collapsed. Chairs screeched back. Someone screamed her name. The children froze. Jeremy lunged toward her, shouting for someone to call 911. The entire house erupted into chaos, forks clattering onto plates, glasses tipping, voices breaking into frantic fragments. I didn't move. I sat there, hands folded, watching as paramedics rushed in through my front door, their radios crackling, their bags thudding against the floor. Their calm urgency sliced through the panic like a knife. And as they lifted Sheila onto the stretcher, as Jeremy's face twisted in horror and confusion, as red and blue lights flashed across the dining room walls, I understood exactly what had just happened, and exactly who that gravy had been meant for. When the ambulance doors slammed shut and the siren began to fade down the street, the house didn't fall silent. It collapsed into a strange, hollow emptiness. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs stood crooked. The food grew cold on the table. No one knew what to do next. But I knew exactly what I was feeling. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. A truth that had been whispering at my door for years had finally stepped fully into the light. Jeremy didn't look at me as he paced back and forth across the dining room, rubbing the back of his neck, muttering to himself. He didn't look at me when he grabbed his coat, or when Sheila's purse fell from the chair and spilled across the floor. He didn't even glance my direction before he rushed out behind the paramedics. That told me everything. Because once upon a time, my son used to look at me the way all children look at their mothers. Like I held the sun and the sky and every answer in between. But that was a long time ago. Long before adulthood nudged him into ambitions he never quite achieved, before bills piled up, before he realized I was an easier solution than hard work. Before he started seeing me not as mom, but as opportunity. When people talk about strained families, they often start with the biggest blow. The fight, the betrayal, the fracture that split everything in two. But that isn't how it happens in real life. In real life, it begins quietly, softly, in ways that are easy to excuse. Years ago, it was just the little things. Jeremy borrowing money without bringing it up again. Sheila hinting that their mortgage rates were unfair, and Mom, you're so good with finances, can you help us for a bit? The phone calls with a hesitant pause before a request. The sudden warmth right before a signature was needed. The way they grew silent when I asked questions. None of it was enough to scream danger. But it was enough to keep me awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether I was imagining things. I wanted to believe the best of them. That's what mothers do, even when the evidence sits right in front of them. The first time I felt something shift was 3 years earlier, when they visited unexpectedly on a Wednesday night. Jeremy walked in with a grin so bright it almost felt forced, and Sheila carried a new designer purse she conspicuously placed on the kitchen counter. "Mom," he said cheerfully, "we just wanted to check in on you." Check in? Jeremy had never checked in on me a day in his life, unless he needed something. We sat at the table, coffee brewing, small talk swirling weakly between us. Then, almost casually, he placed a thick envelope in front of me. "Just a little paperwork, Mom. Nothing major." The envelope contained forms related to the house, my house, renovation permits, insurance adjustments, something about emergency access. I skimmed, trusted, and signed. It seemed harmless. But now, years later, the memory burned. Not because of what I signed, but because of the smile he gave Sheila afterward. Subtle, satisfied, private. A smile I wasn't meant to see. And Sheila? She was always polite. Polite in that cold, rigid way that people use when they don't quite respect you. Her posture stiffened when I entered a room. Her voice softened too much when she said Mom. Like she was speaking to a fragile stranger, not family. Her compliments always felt like participation trophies. But what I couldn't ignore were the small glances. The silent exchanges she and Jeremy shared when they thought I wasn't paying attention. A raised eyebrow. A quick grimace. A subtle shake of the head when I declined to pay for something. And the whispers. Oh, the whispers. I caught fragments once. Just needs to sign. Won't notice. You said she trusts you. When I walked into the room, they straightened up instantly, smiling too wide. That was the year I started keeping documents in a drawer I never used. Notes. Receipts. Letters. I didn't know why at the time. Maybe my gut knew something my heart wasn't ready to accept. So when Thanksgiving rolled around and Jeremy insisted, out of nowhere, that he wanted to contribute something special, I should have paid more attention. "I'll make the gravy this year," he said on the phone, sounding too proud of himself. "You've never made gravy before," I reminded him. He laughed. "I'm learning new things." Something about that call felt strange, but I brushed it aside. I wanted the holiday to feel warm, familiar, peaceful. Holidays are supposed to be moments of togetherness, not suspicion. The morning of Thanksgiving, he arrived unusually early. He moved around my kitchen as if he owned it, humming under his breath, chopping ingredients with an enthusiasm that didn't match the task. Sheila stayed out of the way, scrolling on her phone, occasionally glancing toward him with those pointed looks they thought I didn't recognize. When the gravy finished simmering, he insisted on carrying it to the table himself. He wouldn't let me taste it first. Wouldn't let anyone else lift the ladle. He made 3 jokes in a row about secret ingredients. But when I asked what was in it, his eyes flickered. Just for a heartbeat. "Just trust me, Mom." Trust. As if that word hadn't already been stretched thin between us. And then came that moment at the table. The moment that snapped every quiet intuition into sharp focus. His hand was hovering near my plate. His voice too soft. That odd, brittle tension in his jaw. The way he kept watching my fork, not my face. I'd been a mother long enough to recognize when a child, no matter how grown, was waiting for something. Waiting for a reaction. Waiting for a result. Waiting for me to swallow. And that, more than anything, is what made me switch the plates. Not paranoia. Not drama. Not fear. Recognition. The same recognition that had whispered to me for years, warning me that something in my son had changed. And it wasn't changing back. That's why 30 minutes later, when Sheila collapsed, when her skin flushed bright red, when she gasped for air, when Jeremy's eyes darted from her plate to mine in a moment of pure, unmasked horror, I didn't feel shock. Only confirmation. The kind of confirmation that hits like a quiet blow to the chest. The kind that rearranges your understanding of your own family. The kind that tells you your life is no longer what you thought it was. And may never be again. After the ambulance pulled away, I sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by half-finished plates, overturned glasses, and the fading echo of panic. The house felt hollow. Every sound swallowed. Every shadow heavier somehow. The turkey cooled untouched. The candles flickered violently each time the front door opened and closed, but no one looked at me. No one asked if I was all right. They rushed after Sheila, stumbling out with their coats half on, grabbing bags and car keys without thinking. Chairs scraped the floor in a messy stampede, but not a single person turned back. Except Jeremy. For one brief second he paused at the threshold. The cold air from the open door hit his face, chilling his expression into something stripped of its earlier sweetness. His eyes flicked to the two plates on the table. The one Sheila ate from, the one now sitting in front of me. His throat bobbed. His jaw clenched. Then he stepped out and let the door slam behind him so hard the walls shook. That sound, sharp, final, rang through the house long after the car tires faded down the street. Minutes passed. 12 maybe. Or 40. Time melted in the kind of silence that only arrives when everyone else's fear leaves you behind. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping gently instead of violently like theirs had. My knees ached as I stood, but I took my time gathering plates. My hands weren't shaking. My breath wasn't hurried. It was as if my body already knew something my mind was still piecing together. When you've lived long enough, you learn to recognize the shape of danger, even when it hides in familiar faces. I carried the dishes to the sink and turned on the water. The running tap was the only sound in the entire house, comforting in its steadiness. Steam rose, fogging the window above the sink, blurring the world outside. I rinsed each plate with the same rhythm I'd used for 40 years, but now every movement felt strangely hollow. I was washing away gravy I refused to taste. Twice, I stopped myself from throwing the gravy boat into the trash. Something urged me to keep it, not out of sentiment but preservation. Evidence, though I wasn't ready to call it that. Not yet. With a slow, deliberate motion, I reached for a mason jar from the cabinet, poured the remaining gravy into it, sealed it tight, and slid it into the refrigerator behind the cranberry jelly. The glass clinked softly, a sound far too delicate for what it represented. Then I turned off the sink and let the quiet settle again. I walked back to the dining room, sat in my chair, and stared at the empty spot Sheila's plate had occupied. Just an hour earlier, she'd been laughing, her bracelets jingling as she brushed her hair behind her ear. Now her chair sat angled away from the table, abandoned like something knocked over in a storm. Outside, the ambulance lights had painted frantic strokes of red across the snow. I watched those reflections pulse over the walls, flicker through the window, and finally fade into nothing. A part of me expected my heart to race, expected panic or grief or fear to swell in my chest. But all I felt was a strange clarity, a calm so sharp it felt like cold metal pressed against my spine. People often assume age turns you fragile. They're wrong. It turns you attentive. The mind starts cataloging details the way young people never think to. The odd pauses, the shifting tones, the glances exchanged across a room. And tonight, those details painted a picture I could no longer unsee. Jeremy's insistence, his hovering hand, his attempt to redirect the plate, his stiffening when he noticed the switch, his daughter collapsing minutes later. There are coincidences, and then there are patterns. 10 minutes after cleaning up, my phone buzzed on the dining table. I didn't rush for it. I let it buzz twice before picking it up. A text from Jeremy. She's stable. At the ER. We'll keep you updated. Not one question about me. Not are you okay? Not did you taste the gravy? Not I'm worried about you. Just a sterile update, as if I were a distant relative he barely knew. I set the phone down. The screen dimmed, and the reflection staring back at me wasn't frightened. It was weary and awake. I reached for my glasses, slid them up the bridge of my nose, and looked directly at the two plates still sitting at opposite ends of the table. The difference between them felt like the difference between life and something darker. Instinct had saved me. But instinct alone wasn't enough. Not anymore. After rinsing the last dish, I made myself a cup of coffee, lukewarm, comfortless, but familiar, and carried it to the living room. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second marking the gap between the life I thought I had and the one I realized I was living. I lowered myself onto the sofa and stared at the dark window, watching my reflection shift in the glass. An elderly woman. A mother. A grandmother. And suddenly, someone who might have been a target. That thought landed like a stone dropped into deep water. My hands tightened around the mug. I replayed Thanksgiving moment by moment, like rewinding an old tape, searching for the point where everything changed, searching for warning signs I dismissed, searching for the moment suspicion shifted into certainty. The scene formed clearly in my mind. Jeremy standing in the kitchen earlier that afternoon, leaning over the pot of gravy, stirring too methodically. The way he jumped when I walked in unexpectedly, knocking a spice jar onto the counter. The glass bottle he slid into his pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. His nervous laugh, too loud, too thin. The memories linked themselves together like pieces of a puzzle I'd ignored for years. By the time the clock struck midnight, I wasn't left with fear. I was left with truth. And a truth like this doesn't sit quietly. It doesn't stay still. It claws for space, demanding acknowledgement. So I made a promise to myself, right there, in that dim living room, with cold coffee in my hands and a storm gathering somewhere deep inside me. Tonight was not the end of something. Tonight was the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with the overhead light off, letting the dim glow of the old yellow lamp by the sink spill across the room in a soft crescent. It cast long shadows across the linoleum floor. Shadows that felt heavier than they had the day before. The house still smelled faintly of turkey, cinnamon, and something else, something metallic, lingering, like a question refusing to leave. My coffee had gone cold an hour earlier, but I held the mug anyway, needing the weight of it in my hands. At my age, hands need something to anchor them when the mind is swimming. The clock behind me ticked in steady beats, too loud in the quiet. Every tick pushed my thoughts forward whether I wanted them to go there or not. I kept replaying the moment Jeremy noticed I'd switched the plates. The way his smile skipped, like a record catching on a scratch. The way his eyes sharpened, just for an instant before he softened them again. The way he said, "That one's yours, Mom." Like a reminder, not a suggestion. No, I couldn't ignore that anymore. I rose slowly, setting the mug down on the table, and crossed the kitchen to the refrigerator. My joints protested, but I ignored them. I opened the door and reached behind the cranberry jelly for the mason jar I'd tucked away. The gravy inside looked harmless. Smooth. Dark. Thick. Nothing unusual for a Thanksgiving meal. But last night had made everything suspect. I unscrewed the lid and held it up to the light. The gravy glistened with its usual sheen. The herbs clung to the surface in little flecks. But as I tilted the jar, something shifted. Something too small for the naked eye, but not too small for the instincts of a 72-year-old woman who'd spent her life watching people closely. Specks. Tiny specks that didn't look like pepper, thyme, or anything I normally used. I wasn't imagining it. My hands weren't as steady as they were years ago, but they were steady enough to know what they saw. I poured a small amount onto a white plate and dragged a spoon across it, spreading it thin. There, pressed into the swirl of gravy, was the speck again, darker, sharper, nothing like a spice. My heartbeat didn't accelerate. My breath didn't catch. It was strange. When you're young, fear hits you like a wave. When you're old, truth settles in like snow. Quiet. Inevitable. Cold. I lifted the speck with the tip of a toothpick and stared at it under the lamp. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. It didn't belong in food. I rinsed the plate, washed the jar thoroughly, and set it on the counter to dry. I wanted no trace of anything that could be used against me or twisted into something I couldn't defend. What I needed now was proof. A record. Something that existed beyond my own word. I wrote a short note to myself, a date, a time, what I saw, nothing dramatic, just facts. Age teaches you that facts matter more than feelings when people start to question your sanity. As I closed the notebook, My phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a message from Jeremy. Still in the ER. She's stable. No punctuation beyond that. No warmth. No concern for me. Not one word asking if I'd even tasted the gravy. I turned the phone face down. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows slightly, scattering old leaves across the porch. My thoughts, rattled along with it, moved through the years, through every moment I'd doubted myself but kept quiet to avoid upsetting the family, through every time I'd smoothed over something that didn't sit right because I wanted peace. But peace is expensive, and sometimes you don't realize how much it costs until someone tries to take the last piece of it away. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. And that's when I heard the soft creak of the house settling, the old pipes humming, the faint ticking of the clock, and beneath it all, a new sound, resolve rising in my chest. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. The next morning, I woke not because of sunlight or alarm, but because my mind refused to let me drift further into comfort. It tugged me awake with a singular focus. Find answers. Around noon my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately, my granddaughter, Caitlin. 17. Soft voice. Steady eyes. Grandma, she whispered. My heart softened. I'm here, sweetheart. Are you sitting down? I lowered myself into the chair. I am. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice trembling the way truth trembles when it's about to change everything. Go ahead. I saw Dad in the kitchen yesterday. Before dinner. My grip tightened on the phone. He was doing something to the gravy. My breath stilled. She continued, voice quivering. He had this little glass bottle, like a dropper. He squeezed something into the pot when he thought no one was around. My eyes closed, not in shock but in a heavy, painful confirmation. Are you sure, honey? Yes, she whispered. He looked nervous. And when he noticed me, he jumped. He told me to go help set the table. A long silence filled the line. Not heavy, just final. I swallowed back the ache in my throat. You did the right thing telling me. Her voice cracked. I didn't know if I should, but something felt wrong. And when Mom collapsed, it's all right, I said gently. You did exactly what you were supposed to. We stayed quiet for a moment, breathing together across the distance. Then she whispered, Grandma, what's happening? I stared at the mason jar on the counter, now scrubbed clean. Something, I said quietly, that I should have seen sooner. When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't doubt myself even once. I stood, walked to the drawer where I kept old papers, envelopes, and documents, and pulled it open. If last night was my warning, today was the beginning of finding proof. And I wasn't going to stop until I had all of it. Caitlin's call haunted the rest of the afternoon. Not in a frightening way. Fear had long since stepped aside, but in the way truth lingers after it's been spoken aloud. It sits with you, settles into your bones, and shifts the way you see everything around you. I moved through the house slowly, touching surfaces out of habit. The back of the couch, the kitchen counter, the edge of the dining table. Everywhere I touched, I could still feel the remnants of last night's chaos. The overturned chair, the scattered silverware, the cold smear of gravy drying on a plate. But none of it disturbed me as much as Caitlin's voice had. Quiet, hesitant, yet steady with something she couldn't ignore. That girl had always been observant. She had Derek's eyes, my husband's, clear, thoughtful eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. She was the only one in that family who ever truly listened. And now she was the only reason I didn't doubt what I already knew. It was evening when she called again. The sun had dipped below the houses across the street, casting long shadows across my living room. I picked up the phone before the second ring. Grandma, she said, her voice a little stronger this time. Can I come over? Of course, honey. I didn't even bother asking if her parents knew. Somehow, I already knew the answer. 15 minutes later, her mother's car pulled up to the curb. She stepped out quietly, hugged her arms against the cold, and hurried up the path to my porch. When I opened the door, she slipped inside like someone trying not to disturb the air. Her eyes were red. Not from crying, but from holding things in. I guided her to the kitchen table, The same place everything had unfolded just 24 hours earlier. The chair she sat in had been Sheila's seat the night before. That irony wasn't lost on either of us. She fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. I don't know where to start. Just start where it hurts, I said gently. That's usually where the truth lives. She let out a shaky breath. Mom and Dad said I shouldn't talk to you. They said you're confused, that you're forgetting things. A familiar ache pressed against my ribs, but I kept my expression calm. Do you think I'm confused? She looked up sharply. No, not at all. There it was, the steady gaze, the clarity I'd always admired in her. Then tell me what's on your mind. She swallowed. I heard them talking last night, when they thought I went downstairs to do laundry. My fingertips tingled. What did they say? She hesitated, but only for a moment. Then the words poured out. Mom said she shouldn't have switched plates. And Dad said something like, it was supposed to be her. Just enough to raise concern, not this. My heart didn't break. It didn't crack. It settled. Cleanly. Quietly. Like a puzzle piece snapping into place. Caitlin continued, voice trembling. I didn't want to believe it, Grandma. But I saw him with that little bottle. And now, Mom. She keeps saying you need a mental evaluation. She keeps saying you're paranoid. I felt the injustice of it rise hot in my chest, but I refused to let it harden into anger. Anger clouds judgment. And clarity was the only weapon I had left. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. Mine were steady. Honey, I said softly, you are very brave for telling me this. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. I know, I whispered. But you're not alone. And you're not responsible for the adults in this situation. Do you understand me? You did the right thing. The grown-ups will take it from here. She wiped her cheeks, nodding. I don't want anything to happen to you, she whispered. It won't, I assured her. Not now. Not anymore. Something shifted in her expression. Some mix of relief and resolve. She leaned forward and hugged me, arms tight around my shoulders. I held her just as tightly. For the first time since yesterday, warmth spread through me. Not because the danger had passed, but because I finally had someone on my side. Someone who wasn't trying to deceive me. Someone who saw what I saw. Caitlin's voice, trembling and terrified, had given me something priceless. Confirmation. Witness. Support. And that meant the next steps wouldn't be taken in fear, but in certainty. When she left that evening, she turned back at the door and said, if you need me, I'll tell whoever I have to. I won't let them scare me. I smiled at her. The first real smile I'd managed since Thanksgiving began. I know you won't, I said. And when the door closed behind her, I stood in the dim hallway and took a long, steady breath. My granddaughter had given me more than information. She had given me a reason to fight. The next step was clear, and it was sitting in a drawer upstairs, waiting for me to open it. After Caitlin left, the house felt heavier, but not in the suffocating way it had the night before. This heaviness was different. It was purposeful. It settled on my shoulders like a coat I finally recognized as my own. Responsibility, clarity, and a long overdue readiness to face things I had ignored for too long. The truth wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a shape, a face, a motive, and it was time to confront it. I walked slowly up the stairs, one hand trailing along the banister. The wood, worn smooth from years of use, felt familiar beneath my fingertips. Derek had stained that banister himself after our first winter in the house. I used to run my hands along it without thinking, but tonight the memory steadied me. Strength comes from remembering where you've been, not from pretending you don't know where you're going. At the top of the stairs, I paused to catch my breath. Age has a way of reminding you that even courage needs pacing. Then I crossed to the far corner of my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my old oak dresser. The drawer stuck slightly, as it always had. A stubborn thing, but reliable. Inside was a stack of envelopes, folded documents, a few manila folders, and a red notebook I hadn't touched in years. I had always kept personal papers here, receipts, warranties, legal documents, letters from Derek, Small things that mattered once and still mattered now. But tonight, I wasn't looking for sentiment. I was looking for answers. I pulled out the stack of envelopes one by one, spreading them across the bed. The papers inside had curled edges from age, ink fading in places, signatures I barely remembered signing. And that was the first warning. I opened one envelope, the one with the city logo faintly printed on it. A permit form for a garage project Jeremy had insisted needed my immediate approval last spring. He had said it was just paperwork, nothing worth reading closely. I skimmed the form now, and an uneasy sensation crept up my spine. Why had my name appeared 3 separate times? Why was the authorization section filled out in Jeremy's handwriting instead of mine? Why was the date printed the same day he'd dropped by without warning? I set it aside. The next envelope was heavier, several sheets stapled together. A medical release, I thought. No, not exactly. As I turned the pages, legal terms leapt out. Durable power of attorney. Full financial authority. In the event of incapacity. The farther I read, the colder I felt. I remembered the day Jeremy brought this to me. A rainy Tuesday in March. He'd arrived with 2 coffees and that same bright smile he wore at Thanksgiving. He'd told me it was just for emergencies, something the doctor recommended, something all elderly parents should have in place. Nothing major, he had said, sliding the forms across the table. You can trust me. I had signed it. Of course I had. What mother wants to believe her son would trick her? I sat on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling between my fingers, not from fear, but from clarity. That crisp, razor-edged clarity that slices away every doubt. This was motive. If I had fallen ill, even temporarily, they would have gained access to my accounts, my house, my investments, my assets, my decisions, everything. I dropped the document onto the bed like it was burning my hands. Next, I picked up the red notebook, the one I hadn't touched since Derek died. I'd kept it as a place for small notes, reminders, bill records, little things I never thought I'd need again. The first page I opened wasn't from me. It was from Jeremy. A sticky note, the ink slightly smudged. Mom signed this. It's just a quick permit. I forgot to file something. I traced the shaky signature beneath it. My own handwriting, but rushed, the kind I used when I trusted someone enough not to read every line. I flicked to the next page. An email printout lay tucked there. An authorization form for temporary access to one of my investment accounts. I didn't remember this one at all. A chill crawled across my skin. I reached the bottom of the drawer and found one last envelope. A white one with a folded piece of paper inside. When I opened it, a list slid out. Joint expenses, it said at the top. And below that, paid amounts, labeled as reimbursements I supposedly approved. My signature was at the bottom again, shaky and slanted. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I doubted it, but because I recognized the shape of manipulation in every curve of the pen. Jeremy's tactics had never been aggressive. They'd been gentle, repeated, small pushes that nudged me closer and closer to handing him pieces of my life, one paper at a time. And if last night had gone his way? If Sheila hadn't taken the wrong plate? If I had fallen ill, confused, disoriented? His foundation would have been complete. The thought settled into me like winter frost. Silent, creeping, undeniable. I closed the drawer slowly. No more quiet compliance. No more trusting smiles. No more signatures handed out like candy. I was done being the naive mother who believed her son would never do something unthinkable. I reached for my phone with a steady hand. It was time to call my lawyer. I called Michael the next morning. My voice was steady, but something inside me felt like a taut wire, pulled tight, humming with a quiet urgency. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Reynolds, he said in that calm, measured tone he always used. Is everything all right? No, I replied plainly. But it will be. I need to see you today. He hesitated only long enough to register the seriousness in my voice. Of course. Come in at 2. Bring any documents you have. Documents. I had more than enough of those now. When I walked into his office that afternoon, the world outside felt muted, the sky a dull winter gray, the wind slicing across Main Street. Inside, though, the warmth hit me like a blanket. Soft lighting, polished wood, stacks of neat files. A place built for order. A place where confusion had no room to breathe. "Take a seat," he said, standing as I entered. "You sounded troubled." Troubled? That wasn't the word I'd use. Determined? That was closer. I laid the stack of papers on his desk. The envelopes, the photocopies, the forms with my shaky signatures. The red notebook. And finally, the power of attorney documents. He looked at the pile, then at me. "Tell me what happened." So I did. Not the emotional pieces, not the betrayal or the confusion. I saved those for myself. I gave him the facts. The Thanksgiving incident, the gravy, the collapse, the suspicious behavior, the granddaughter's confession, and the documents I'd rediscovered. I watched his expression shift slowly as he pieced it all together. The way a craftsman examines a cracked foundation before calling it what it is. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Reynolds, what your son has done isn't just concerning. It's predatory." I nodded. "I know." He sifted through the papers one by one, reading with increasing intensity. "This," he said, tapping the durable power of attorney, "is far more extensive than what he implied. It grants him full access, financial, medical, legal. If something had happened to you last night. That's why I'm here," I said quietly. He leaned back, the weight of everything sinking into the room around us. "First, we revoke this. Immediately." "Good," I replied. "Do it." He drafted the revocation papers with quick efficiency, typing, printing, making notes. I watched him work, the tapping of his keyboard oddly comforting. Each click felt like a step away from the trap I hadn't known I'd been walking toward. When the documents were ready, he pushed them across the table. "Read every line," he said gently. "I'll walk you through anything you don't understand." I did. This time, I read carefully. Line by line. Slowly. Thoroughly. And when I signed, my hand didn't tremble. "Now," he continued, "you need protection moving forward." Meaning, a new power of attorney. One you choose. Someone who won't misuse it. I didn't hesitate. "My granddaughter. Caitlin." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Not Jeremy?" I met his eyes squarely. "Not Jeremy." He nodded, understanding instantly, and began drafting again. "She's still a minor, so we'll pair her with a temporary co-trustee. I'll recommend someone impartial, someone who answers only to you." "That's fine." Next came the living will, which he insisted we update. Then the revised healthcare directive. Each document placed another layer of protection between me and whatever plan Jeremy had been nurturing. When all the forms were ready, he slid them across the desk for me to review. The stack felt heavier than it looked, like I was holding a shield in paper form. I read every word. Twice. Then I signed them all. My voice felt steadier when I finally spoke again. "What happens now?" Michael leaned forward slightly. "Now you create distance. You secure your accounts. You protect your assets. And you prepare for a reaction." "A reaction?" He nodded. "Your son will realize something is wrong when his access suddenly disappears. Men who rely on control don't handle losing it very well." I felt no need to defend Jeremy. Not anymore. "What do you recommend?" I asked. He folded his hands. "Be calm. Be consistent. Document everything. Don't confront him directly. If he reaches out, don't explain your actions. Simply say your attorney is handling your affairs." I breathed out slowly. "I understand. And Mrs. Reynolds," he added gently, "you're doing the right thing." For the first time in days, I felt a true, grounded calm settle inside me. Like I'd stepped onto solid ground after walking through fog. As I gathered my coat, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll stay ahead of this. You're not alone." I thanked him and stepped back out into the cold afternoon. The wind nipped at my cheeks, but I didn't feel fragile or exposed. I felt fortified. Behind me, the office door clicked shut, a quiet, satisfying sound. Ahead of me, the real battle was waiting. And this time I was ready. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Not from restlessness, but from purpose. It had been years since I moved with this much clarity. Fear still flickered somewhere inside me, but it no longer dictated my steps. I dressed, ate a small breakfast, tucked my documents into my purse, and drove to the bank. The parking lot was half empty, the branches of the bare maple trees shaking in the wind. The sky hung low and gray, matching the heaviness in my chest. Not dread, just a sober determination. Inside, the bank smelled faintly of copier toner and polished floors. A young teller with a crisp smile greeted me, but when I asked to speak with a manager about my accounts, her expression shifted. She nodded quickly and directed me to a waiting area. A few minutes later, Mr. Lee appeared, a man somewhere in his 40s, with a duck-patterned tie and eyes that sparkled with polite efficiency. But when he saw the paperwork under my arm and the set of my shoulders, his expression softened into something more attentive. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said warmly, "please come in." His office was neat, small, but inviting. I sat down and placed my folder on the desk. "I need to review my accounts," I said. "Specifically, any recent transactions and authorizations connected to my son." He blinked, surprised, but nodded. "Of course. Let me pull up your file." His fingers typed swiftly across the keyboard. The screen's glow reflected in his glasses as he scanned through pages of information. I watched his posture shift, straightening slightly, tension building at the corners of his eyes. After a moment, he spoke carefully. "There appear to be several linked authorizations, including a joint access account with J. Reynolds and S. Reynolds. It's been active for a while." My stomach tightened, but my voice remained steady. "Show me." He turned the monitor slightly. There it was. A monthly automatic transfer, $1,500, labeled maintenance support. Unauthorized withdrawals totaling thousands. Charges for services I never used or approved. Bills. Repairs. Amazon orders. Photographer fees. A flagged $2,500 emergency withdrawal. My hands curled into fists on my lap. Not once had Jeremy mentioned any of this. Not a single word. Mr. Lee continued scrolling, then hesitated. "Mrs. Reynolds." These authorizations were granted under a durable power of attorney, dated March. I expected the sting, but the sting didn't come. Instead, there was a dull, cold acceptance. "I revoked that yesterday," I said. "My lawyer will send confirmation." His eyebrows lifted. "In that case, we can terminate all linked access immediately." "Yes," I said. "Terminate them." He nodded, typed a few commands, and printed forms for me to sign. I signed each one slowly, clearly, making sure every letter was firm. And I added, "I want a restriction placed on this account. No changes without my in-person authorization. No online access. No phone approvals." "That's absolutely possible," he replied. "And I want the last 12 months of statements printed." He paused, then nodded. "Of course." While the printer hummed, I allowed myself a single breath, long, steady, and full of an emotion I hadn't felt in years: control. When he returned with the thick stack of papers, I accepted them with both hands. The weight of them pressed into my palms like proof. Heavy, undeniable proof. Mr. Lee cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Reynolds, is everything all right?" No one had asked me that yesterday. Not once. I met his gaze. "I'm handling it." He studied me for a moment, then nodded in a way that suggested respect rather than pity. As I stood to leave, he added, "If you need help with anything else, anything at all, come straight to me." I thanked him and stepped out into the cold afternoon air. The paper stack rustled inside my purse with each step, each shift of the wind. With every sound, I felt more resolute. In my car, I sat for a moment and laid the statements across the passenger seat. Line after line of numbers stared back at me, each one a small betrayal, each one a reminder. Jeremy hadn't stumbled into desperation. He had built a system that drained from me quietly, month after month. A system he assumed I would never notice. A system he planned to complete by pushing me into confusion, incapacity, or worse. I traced one line with my fingertip, a withdrawal I never made, and felt something inside me shift. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was theft. Calculated. Intentional. Cautious. The kind that's done by someone who thinks you're too old to catch on. I closed the folder and set it aside. My hands no longer trembled. The sadness that had weighed me down days ago had transformed into something steadier, sharper. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, safety, and the simple truth that I would not be erased in silence. I put the car in drive and headed home. The storm had started, but I wasn't the one who needed to be afraid of it. 2 days passed before I saw Sheila again. I didn't wait for an invitation. Invitations were for families built on respect, not manipulation. I parked in front of their neatly trimmed lawn. The same lawn I once helped weed when they first moved in, and walked straight up the path to their door. The air was crisp, sharp enough to sting my cheeks. The wind rattled the wind chimes on their porch, a fragile, nervous sound that mirrored the way my heart pressed steadily against my ribs. When I rang the doorbell, Sheila answered almost immediately, as if she'd been standing on the other side waiting. She wasn't pale like she'd been the night she collapsed, but her face held a drained, brittle tightness. Her expression flickered when she saw me, surprise first, then something colder. Fear perhaps, or guilt pretending to be composure. "Hi, Mom," she said, stiff as an ironing board. "Hello, dear." My tone was calm, even polite, because calmness unsettles the guilty far more than anger ever could. "May I come in?" She hesitated. That 1-second pause confirmed more to me than any words would have. She stepped aside anyway. The living room smelled like eucalyptus and store-bought candles. Everything was spotless, staged, like a home ready for an open house viewing. But beneath the polished surfaces was a tremor, a quiet tension thickening every corner of the room. I sat on the chair near the window, the one I'd always used when visiting, the one where I once held Caitlin as a baby. Sheila perched on the edge of the couch, spine rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "How are you feeling?" I asked. She offered a tight smile. "Better. The doctor said it was an allergic reaction." I nodded. "I'm glad you're recovering. I wanted to see you, just you, so we could talk quietly." Her shoulders lifted in a shallow breath. "About what?" "The night of Thanksgiving," I said gently. "You got sick very suddenly. And I want things to be clear." Her face twitched just slightly. A flicker of something she didn't want me to see. "I ate your gravy," Sheila said quickly, almost defensively. "It must have been cross-contamination or something. You know how kitchens get during holidays." "No," I murmured. "I know how people get during holidays." Silence stretched between us. Then she dropped her gaze to her hands. "I don't know what you're suggesting." I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending. That we stop the polite charade of family harmony when the truth is standing in plain sight." Her breath hitched just barely. "Mom, I know," I said softly, cutting her off. "And you know that I know." Her eyes lifted, wide, fearful, searching. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." The words slipped out of her mouth before she could stop them. Her eyes widened, as though she hadn't meant to speak them aloud. That was all I needed. I stood slowly. My joints ached, but my resolve held me steady. "I'm not here to accuse you," I said. "I'm here to tell you that the game is over. Whatever plans you and Jeremy had, they end now." Sheila's jaw clenched. She said nothing. I walked to the door, paused, and looked back at her one last time. "I am not confused," I said softly. "And I will not be erased." Then I left her sitting in that immaculate room, staring at the truth she could no longer outrun. Caitlin showed up at my door the very next evening. No text, no call, just 3 quick knocks that sounded far too urgent for a casual visit. When I opened the door, she slipped inside with her backpack hugged tightly against her chest, eyes darting over her shoulder as though she feared someone might have followed her. I closed the door gently behind her. "Honey," I said softly, "what's wrong?" She looked up at me, face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. She swallowed hard, then whispered, "I have something to show you." I guided her into the living room. She sat on the couch, pulled her backpack onto her lap, and unzipped it with trembling hands. She didn't speak right away. She just stared at the open bag, breathing shakily, as if gathering the courage to pull the truth into the world. Finally, she reached inside and brought out her phone. I recorded something, she murmured. I wasn't supposed to, but I had to. My heart tightened, not with fear, but with a deep, painful mix of heartbreak and gratitude. Take your time, I said. She tapped her screen, and a video began to play. The audio crackled at first, then settled. I recognized the kitchen, their kitchen. And then voices. Jeremy's voice. Harsh. Low. Controlled in that dangerously quiet way he used when he thought he was being smart. She shouldn't have switched plates, he hissed. Sheila answered, voice strained. You didn't tell me she'd notice. She wasn't supposed to notice, he snapped. It was just meant to make her sick. Enough to force a checkup. Enough for the doctor to question her memory. My hands tightened around the arm of the chair. Caitlin looked away, unable to meet my eyes as the recording continued. Sheila spoke again. Frantic now. What about me? What did you even put in it? He cursed under his breath. It wasn't dangerous in small amounts. You weren't supposed to eat that much. My pulse didn't spike. My breath didn't falter. I listened the way a mother listens when the truth finally reveals itself after years of denial. The recording ended with a scrape of a chair and Sheila's panicked whisper. Jeremy, what do we do now? Caitlin stopped the video with a trembling finger. She looked at me, eyes glossy with fear. Grandma, I didn't want to believe it. But I couldn't just pretend I didn't hear it. I reached across and took her hand gently. You did exactly what you should have done. Her voice cracked. Dad's been angry all day. He thinks I'm hiding something. I squeezed her hand. You're safe here. She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tense, like she was bracing for the world to collapse around her. I sat back slowly, letting the weight of the recording settle into me. It wasn't just confirmation. It was evidence, clear, undeniable, damning evidence. Proof of intent. Proof of malice. Proof that everything I feared had been real. Caitlin whispered. What are you going to do? I looked at her. My granddaughter, the only person who had stood between truth and silence, and felt something steady rise inside me. Exactly what needs to be done, I said. And you won't have to carry any of this alone. She leaned into me, tears brimming, and I held her tightly. She had brought me proof. Now it was my turn to use it. The morning after Caitlin brought me the recording, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not the foggy panic of the past few days. Not the dull ache of betrayal. This was something sharper. Purpose. Resolve. A steady fire that warmed instead of scorched. I made myself tea, changed into my nicest coat, and gathered all the documents, including the recording saved on a flash drive. Then I drove straight to the police station. The fluorescent lights inside hummed softly. A young officer at the front desk looked up as I approached, offering a polite smile that faded slightly when he saw the seriousness in my expression. How can I help you today, ma'am? I need to file a report, I said, voice steady. About a potential poisoning and ongoing financial abuse. His eyebrows lifted, eyes sharpening. Please follow me. He led me into a small interview room, gray walls, metal table, 2 chairs. Not warm, but not unkind. Just neutral. A place where truth is laid out plainly. Detective Alvarez entered a moment later. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a posture that told me she didn't waste time with nonsense. I understand you have some concerns, she began gently. Yes. I placed the folder on the table. And proof. I laid out the documents one by one. Unauthorized withdrawals. Altered signatures. The revoked power of attorney. Notes about the Thanksgiving incident. And finally, the flash drive. When I finished, she didn't say anything for several seconds. She simply studied me with a long, assessing look. The kind reserved for people who have survived more than they admit. Mrs. Reynolds, she said carefully, I want to be clear. What you're bringing forward is serious. Very serious. I understand, I replied. I'm not confused. I'm not imagining things. And I'm not afraid of telling the truth. A small nod of respect formed at the corner of her mouth. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop. As the audio played, her expression shifted from analytical to unsettled. When the recording ended, she sat back slowly. "This is enough to open an investigation," she said. "And enough to warrant protective documentation. Especially given your age and your son's access to your personal affairs." I exhaled. Not relief, exactly, but the release that comes from finally being heard. "We'll file this formally," she continued, typing quickly. "And I recommend you speak with Adult Protective Services as well. It will create an official record from another authority." "I'm prepared for that." She paused, then leaned forward. "You did the right thing coming here." I nodded. My granddaughter gave me the courage. Her expression softened for the first time. "You're not alone in this." Later that afternoon, I met with the caseworker from Adult Protective Services. She spoke kindly, but there was a quiet edge to her questions. Testing for confusion, for exaggeration, for the fragility older people are so often wrongfully assumed to carry. I answered everything calmly, factually, clearly. Dates. Documents. Events. No trembling. No uncertainty. When she finished, she closed her notebook and looked at me with a frank, respectful expression. "You're very lucid," she said. "And your concerns are legitimate." "I know," I replied softly. She gave me her card. "If anything changes, call me immediately. We'll be monitoring the situation." When I walked out of that office, the winter air hit my face with a crisp wave. But for the first time in days, it didn't sting. The law was moving. The truth was documented. And my voice, my elderly, underestimated voice, was finally echoing in the right places. The battle had begun. But so had my protection. 2 days after filing the report and speaking with APS, I woke to a quiet house, a steadier quiet than before. Not fearful, not heavy, just settled. Like the dust had finally stopped swirling. But the peace didn't last long. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a string of calls, Jeremy's number flashing again and again. I let each one ring out. He didn't leave voicemails at first. But by the 5th call, the messages began. "Mom, we need to talk. Call me back." Then another. "What did you do with the bank? They said my access is revoked." Then, "I know you're confused, okay? Just call me." Confused. There it was, the word he was so desperate to weaponize. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, listening calmly to every message. His voice grew sharper with each one, the polite veneer cracking. "Mom, this isn't funny. Call me back. Right now." I didn't. By early afternoon, a text arrived. "We need to meet. I need to know what's going on." I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a single reply. "My attorney is handling my affairs. Direct any questions to him. Nothing more. No explanations. No apologies. No entry points for manipulation." Minutes later, another string of calls came, angrier now, almost frantic. But here's the thing about people who rely on intimidation. They panic when it stops working. He had spent years assuming I wouldn't question him, wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight back. Now his access was gone, his control slipping through his fingers faster than he could grasp it. And that terrified him. Later that evening, I received a call. Not from Jeremy, but from Detective Alvarez. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, "we've opened a formal case. The recording and financial documents give us more than enough grounds. We'll be contacting your son for questioning." A slow breath left me, steady and sure. "Thank you. You won't be notified of the details until necessary," she added. "But I wanted you to know he's no longer operating in the dark." Operating in the dark. A fitting phrase. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one stumbling through shadows. When the call ended, I sat in my living room, the lamplight casting warm gold across the walls, and felt something inside me shift. Not relief. Not victory. Control. The storm Jeremy tried to create was circling back toward him now, and I was finally standing in the light. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not the fragile quiet of fear, but the kind that settles in after a storm finally breaks and the world exhales. My house felt like mine again. The walls no longer carried tension. The corners no longer held shadows. Even the ticking of the old clock sounded softer, steadier. I spent one morning organizing the documents Michael prepared, placing each one neatly in a fireproof box, labeling everything clearly. For the first time in a long while, my future felt protected, not precarious. A knock sounded mid-afternoon. When I opened the door, Caitlin stood there with a small smile and cheeks pink from the cold. "Grandma," she said, stepping inside. "I just wanted to check on you." I pulled her into a hug. She relaxed instantly in my arms, like she'd been carrying the weight of the past week on those young shoulders. We sat together in the living room. No tension, no secrets, no fear between us. I gave her a folder with her name on it. When she opened it and saw the updated documents making her my primary decision-maker one day, her eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" she whispered. I nodded. "You've already shown me you know how to protect the truth. And you've shown me who you are." She hugged me again, tighter this time. "I won't let anything happen to you," she said. "I know," I replied softly. "And now everything is in writing. They can't touch me again." As evening settled in, we sat quietly, watching the soft glow of the lamp reflect off the window. For the first time in weeks, peace didn't feel fragile, it felt earned. And before I end my story, if you've connected with it, if you want to hear more true stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know.